Have you ever experienced that peculiar, almost surreal sensation of being the subject of a conversation, utterly unaware that you're understanding every single word, while the speakers blithely assume you're clueless? That's the tightrope I found myself walking, a precarious dance that began the moment I met Ariana. She was radiant, a whirlwind of energy and charm, and when our eyes first met across that crowded coffee shop, there was an undeniable spark. The very first question she posed, her gaze unwavering, was a simple "Do you speak Italian?" My immediate, knee-jerk reaction was to be effortlessly charming, to impress her with a smooth yes. I can deliver in impeccable Italian, yet fate, or perhaps just a sudden surge of adrenaline and nerves, had other plans. My tongue felt like a lead weight, and the words, which moments before had felt so familiar, dissolved into a garbled, embarrassing mess. I braced myself for the inevitable awkward silence, the nice try pity in her eyes, certain I had irrevocably sabotaged my chances. But then, a soft giggle escaped her lips, quickly blossoming into full, unrestrained laughter, and the tension in my shoulders melted away. Thank goodness I'm past dating Italians, I mused to myself, a silent, almost desperate plea to the universe. My last Italian ex, bless her heart, had a penchant for turning every private family discussion, every hushed confession, into dinner table fodder, bringing up intimate details unprompted and with unnerving regularity. Good thing I don't know Italian, I thought, a genuine smile now gracing my lips, even as I subtly, yet definitively, steered our burgeoning conversation far, far away from any mention of Italy or its rich linguistic tapestry. By the time the evening drew to a close, a sense of euphoria mingled with a touch of panic. I was already hopelessly, undeniably smitten with Ariana, far too deep to confess my fluency. I convinced myself it was a minor detail, a cross that bridge when I get to it kind of problem, hoping against hope that the bridge would simply never appear. But fate, it seemed, had already constructed a sturdy arch over my carefully avoided linguistic river. The bridge presented itself in the form of my first family dinner at Ariana's parents' home. The air, thick with the aroma of simmering tomato sauce and garlic, was also heavy with anticipation. From the moment I stepped through their grand front door, a subtle yet palpable chill permeated the otherwise cozy atmosphere. Her mother, a formidable woman with eyes that seemed to miss nothing, subjected me to a slow, deliberate appraisal, scanning me from my polished shoes to my somewhat nervous smile. Then, in a tone dripping with an almost theatrical skepticism, she pronounced in Italian, "So this is him, how? Does he even have a job?" The words, clear as church bells, struck me with an icy precision. Before I could even fully process the initial blow, her father, a man whose stern features perfectly mirrored his wife's, chimed in with a dismissive wave of his hand, marketing. My 16-year-old nephew could do that with one hand tied behind his back, a burning flush crept up my neck, but I forced my face into a mask of polite incomprehension. Ariana, sensing the shift in dynamics, quickly leaned in and murmured a few urgent words to her parents, words I knew were likely a defense of my character or, perhaps, a plea for decorum. Her parents responded with a series of low chuckles, their eyes glinting with a shared, private amusement. "Oh, they're just saying how absolutely wonderful it is to finally meet you," Ariana quickly translated, her voice a little too bright, her grip on my hand a little too tight. A silent plea for me to believe her. Their smiles, however, were as brittle and unconvincing as ancient porcelain, radiating precisely zero warmth, their eyes remaining cold, appraising, and utterly devoid of genuine welcome. This chilling tableau was merely the overture to a 2-year symphony of subtle, cutting remarks. For 24 long months, I endured their relentless, Italian-laced dissection of my very being. Every family dinner, every casual visit, felt like a public interrogation, a tribunal where I was the unwitting defendant. My hobbies, for instance, were a favorite target. Imagine, her mother would sigh dramatically, a grown man dedicating his precious hours to watching those ridiculous superhero movies. Her father would nod in agreement, a smirk playing on his lips, as if my cinematic preferences were proof of my utter immaturity. Then, with devastating precision, they would launch into my perceived future with Ariana, their words like poison darts aimed straight at my confidence. "You're truly squandering your precious youth, dear Ariana, on this loser," her mother would declare, her voice laced with mock sympathy. Even my upbringing wasn't safe from their scrutiny. Were his parents perhaps circus clowns? Or something equally unconventional? Her father would muse aloud, their laughter echoing in the otherwise pleasant dining room, each syllable a chisel chipping away at my dignity. Each time, Ariana, my supposed ally, would lean in, her head bowed in a seemingly secretive whisper, only for a faint, almost imperceptible smile to touch her lips. Or a "what can you do?" shrug of her shoulders to betray her. What truly twisted the knife, however, was the incessant, agonizing Marco game. Do you recall, her father would begin, his voice tinged with nostalgia, when Marco, poor dear, would bring those truly exquisite, impossibly expensive wines to dinner, or, Marco's family. They had that magnificent villa nestled in the rolling hills of Tuscany, didn't they? The ultimate blow, delivered with a casual cruelty, was often her mother's lament. At least Marco, bless his soul, could cultivate a proper, dignified beard. After each excruciating comparison, each wistful remembrance of the perfect ex, Ariana would again murmur something almost inaudible to her parents, and then all 3 pairs of eyes would swivel towards me, their gazes filled with an unmistakable, infuriating pity. It was a Herculean effort, a constant battle of wills, to keep the carefully constructed facade of blissful ignorance from crumbling entirely. To prevent the truth from exploding out of me in a furious torrent of fluent Italian. The precarious dam of my deception finally sprung a leak, not with a dramatic burst, but with the mundane act of a misplaced passport. One evening, as Ariana frantically rummaged through drawers, a forgotten relic of my past emerged, a battered, leather-bound notebook, its pages yellowed with age. Filled to the brim with meticulous Italian conjugations, vocabulary lists, and snippets of Dante. I had genuinely expunged its existence from my memory, but here it was, a tangible, irrefutable confession spanning hundreds of pages. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, holding the notebook as if it were a fragile bird. Her face was stark white, devoid of all color, etched with a chilling blend of fear and dawning comprehension. As if the dreadful possibility that I had understood every single word all along had just crystallized into horrifying certainty. My mind, usually a fortress of quick wit, scrambled for an alibi. "Oh, that old thing," I blurted out, before logic could even form a coherent thought. "That was my brother, Jax. He absolutely adored Italian culture before he died." The words tumbled out, a desperate, improvised shield. She lowered her gaze, her silence heavy with unspoken questions, seemingly hesitant to challenge the raw vulnerability of my impromptu grief. But then, a soft, almost imperceptible murmur escaped her lips, a chilling counter-argument. "But Jack died when he was 6. The air in the room solidified." I froze, every nerve ending screaming, the truth of her quiet observation piercing straight through my flimsy narrative. "He who was very advanced for his age," I stammered, the words hollow, even to my own ears, a desperate, pathetic attempt to plug the widening crack in my story. Her eyes narrowed, just perceptibly, but then, in a gesture that felt both loving and deeply unsettling, she simply wrapped her arms around me, offered a fleeting hug, and walked away. I stared up at the ceiling, a surge of adrenaline still coursing through me, and silently dapped up my imaginary brother, believing, in that naive moment, that we had somehow, miraculously, skirted disaster. Unfortunately, the universe, and Ariana, had other plans. Our brief reprieve was nothing more than a prelude to the true Inquisition. That fleeting moment of triumph, that whispered we got away with it, was a cruel mirage. The truth was, we hadn't, not by a long shot. The very next morning, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift began in Ariana's demeanor, a quiet intensity in her gaze that spoke volumes. Soon, the tests started, small, insidious probes designed to prick holes in my carefully constructed ignorance. While she cooked dinner, the kitchen suddenly filled with the melancholic strains of Italian opera or upbeat pop, her eyes darting to my face from behind her chopping board, searching for the slightest flicker of recognition, a telltale tapping of my foot, a subtle hum. Then came the moody suggestions, delivered with an almost innocent curiosity. "Have you ever heard of Cinema Paradiso?" It's a classic. Each question was a fishing hook, dangled expertly as she meticulously scrutinized my blank expression for any telltale twitch, any crack in my performance. Dining out became an agonizing charade, as she'd playfully, yet insistently, asked me to pronounce complex menu items. My deliberately butchered attempts, fraught with exaggerated confusion and mispronunciation, were met with her keen, analytical gaze, assessing not just my pronunciation, but the authenticity of my struggle. It was clear that the mere possibility of me having understood her family's callous remarks for 2 years was eating away at her, gnawing at her peace of mind, driving her to the brink. Her investigation, once subtle, now escalated, becoming a meticulous, almost scientific endeavor of careful observation. Her meticulous investigation soon turned to my digital footprint, a forensic audit of my online life. The first smoking gun she unearthed was on my phone. Italian was listed among my keyboard's language settings. "Oh, that," I shrugged, attempting a casual nonchalance that felt utterly forced. My phone must have just come like that from the factory. I never bothered to delete it. The lie hung in the air, flimsy and transparent. But then, the revelations intensified. She discovered my cinematic habits, specifically my rather incriminating habit of watching The Godfather, a veritable cornerstone of Italian-American culture with Italian subtitles activated. I was just trying to, absorb the authentic atmosphere, like reading the credits. I mumbled, a nervous laugh bubbling up, sounding brittle and unconvincing even to myself. She didn't crack a smile. Next, my Spotify account became a target. While she found no explicitly Italian songs in my meticulously curated playlists, the streaming service's insidious algorithm had, in its digital wisdom, started suggesting entire Italian playlists. Well, I attempted to joke, forcing a lightness I didn't feel. It just knows how much I adore pasta restaurants, I suppose. The silence that followed was deafening. Her unblinking stare a clear indication that my attempts at humor were not only failing but actively fueling her suspicions. Ariana's methods evolved, becoming far more sophisticated, like a seasoned detective meticulously building a case. Her tests grew subtly sharper, laced with cunning. She'd artfully weave Italian words into her otherwise English sentences, her eyes fixed on mine, searching for that telltale spark of comprehension. The pressure was suffocating. Then, another piece of tangible evidence surfaced, a receipt from an Italian bookstore. "Oh, that," I quickly countered, trying to sound utterly unconcerned. "That particular bookstore also happens to have a really excellent coffee bar." I was meeting a client there. My quick thinking felt less like ingenuity and more like frantic desperation. The most damning evidence, however, was unearthed from an old college notebook. While my official transcript proudly displayed my proficiency in Spanish, the margins of that tattered notebook were littered with unmistakably Italian conjugations, verb tables, and grammatical notes. My study buddy was Italian, I explained, grasping at straws. He used to doodle in the margins while we worked. An almost audible sigh of disbelief escaped her lips. But the final, most baffling piece of the puzzle arrived courtesy of my laptop's autocomplete function. As she typed the common Italian word come meaning how into a search bar, the predictive text immediately, chillingly, suggested sty meaning it is. I feigned genuine bewilderment, my brow furrowed in a performance I hoped was convincing. Haha, I mused aloud. Maybe that was from the time you used my laptop for your parents' emails. She stared back, unyielding, knowing full well she'd never touched my laptop for such a purpose. Yet unable to definitively disprove my flimsy accusation. My YouTube history, usually a treasure trove of incriminating data, was conveniently full of inexplicable gaps thanks to my periodic, paranoid habit of clearing it. Each piece of evidence, though circumstantial, tightened the noose of her suspicion, leaving me feeling increasingly exposed and vulnerable. The culmination of Rihanna's relentless sleuthing reached its apex during a cross-country road trip, a journey meant to introduce her to my parents for the very first time. The long hours in the car were punctuated by what felt like her final, most direct psychological probe. If you understood Italian, she asked, her voice deceptively soft, would you have told me? My response, delivered with an almost practiced sincerity, wasn't unequivocal, of course. It was the ultimate, necessary lie to safeguard my carefully constructed deception. Upon our arrival, my mother greeted us with an embrace so genuinely warm it felt like sunshine after a long winter, and for a blissful interlude, everything seemed to be going perfectly. The dinner flowed with easy conversation and laughter, right up until the dessert course. As Mom presented her exquisite homemade tiramisu, Ariana, with an innocent sigh, expressed a heartfelt wish that I could understand her family better, truly connect with them. Oh, but he should, my mother chirped brightly, her eyes twinkling. He spent entire summers with his grandmother learning all sorts of wonderful things. Before she could elaborate, my father, his face suddenly ashen, interjected with a desperate, almost panicked urgency, in England. He practically shouted, his voice a frantic bluster. Yes, in London, hanging out with his English cousins. The room went silent. My mother froze mid-sentence, her spoon, laden with creamy tiramisu, suspended precariously in the air. Her eyes, wide with sudden realization, met Ariana's. Of course, she whispered. It was in England. The blood visibly drained from Ariana's face, leaving it as stark and white as a porcelain doll's. Her gaze, a piercing laser, darted from me to my mother, then to my father, frantically trying to piece together the shattered fragments of truth. Not another word about language was spoken for the rest of the evening, but the drive home was a desolate expanse of crushing silence. Ariana stared out the window, her silhouette rigid, undoubtedly replaying every single family dinner, every cruel, dismissive comment her parents had uttered, every whispered response she had given, every shared laugh at my expense. She now knew, with absolute, horrifying certainty, that I had understood that her family had made me their personal, unwitting joke, and that she, my girlfriend, had not only allowed it but had, in her quiet interventions, been complicit. And perhaps most devastatingly, she now knew that our entire relationship had been founded upon a colossal, deliberate lie. That night, the chasm between us was too vast to bridge, and we slept in separate rooms, the silence heavier than any argument could have been. When I awoke the following morning, a profound sense of dread already coiling in my stomach, I found Ariana in the kitchen. She stood by the counter, cradling a steaming mug of coffee, her back to me, her posture a rigid testament to the emotional storm brewing within her. The air was thick with unspoken truths. Without turning, without even a preliminary greeting, she uttered two words that felt like a death knell. Dobbiamo parlor. We need to talk. The simple, stark phrase, delivered in fluent Italian, struck me with the force of a physical blow. What she proceeded to tell me in the minutes that followed irrevocably reshaped the entire trajectory of my life. She slowly, deliberately, set her coffee cup down on the polished quartz countertop with a soft, almost imperceptible click. A sound that seemed to reverberate through the quiet stillness of the kitchen, amplified by the tension. I noticed, despite her outwardly composed demeanor, that her hands were trembling, just enough to send tiny, agitated ripples across the dark surface of the coffee remaining in her mug. Then, she turned to face me, her eyes locked onto mine, a blend of hurt, anger, and a deep, weary disappointment swirling within their depths. And in a voice that, despite the visible tremor in her hands, remained remarkably steady, she delivered the final, inescapable question. Do you speak Italian? Her perfectly composed facade, usually so impenetrable, now seemed fragile, as if a single word might shatter it entirely. The unspoken question, heavy with anticipation and dread, suspended itself between us, stretching moments into an agonizing eternity, though in reality, only a fleeting second or two had passed. In the depths of her gaze, a profound and sorrowful understanding already resided. A quiet knowing etched their sense that fateful dinner at my parents' house, when my mother, in her usual blunt fashion, inadvertently, yet irrevocably, tore down the elaborate linguistic curtain I'd meticulously maintained. Still, despite this clear-eyed recognition, an undeniable imperative remained. She needed to hear the words from my own lips, needed me to finally dismantle the intricate web of deception I'd spun for 2 excruciating years. confessing a truth that had festered between us like a slowly poisoning secret. A profound, shuddering breath racked my body, reaching deep into my very core, feeling as if it scraped along my ribs before settling, heavy and cold, somewhere near my toes. And then a whispered yes escaped my lips, barely audible, a fragile admission that seemed to evaporate into the stillness, far softer than the decisive declaration I had intended. I'm fluent, I clarified, the confession hanging in the air, thick with unspoken implications. I have been in Italian since I was a mere child, a fact I've meticulously concealed from you. The very act of speaking this truth was akin to the excruciating, yet ultimately liberating sensation of finally extracting a deeply embedded splinter that had festered beneath my skin for what felt like an eternity. A sharp, searing pain, yes, but undeniably vital for healing. Her expression remained remarkably composed, yet a subtle clenching of her jaw, a minute tightening of the muscles, betrayed the immense internal struggle. She offered a slow, deliberate nod, the gesture a silent acknowledgement as her mind meticulously catalogued this newfound reality, not as a revelation, but as the stark, unavoidable confirmation of a suspicion she had already, heartbreakingly, pieced together. In the liquid depths of her eyes, a tumultuous storm brewed, reflecting the raw, multifaceted tapestry of her emotions all at once. There was the sharp sting of betrayal, the simmering heat of anger, and, most profoundly, a palpable, aching grief, a quiet mourning for the foundational trust, the shared understanding. The very essence of what she believed our relationship to be, now revealed as something built upon sand. Her lips parted, a silent attempt to articulate, then snapped shut, as if she were grappling with an unspeakable burden. A flicker of resolve, or perhaps desperation, ignited in her eyes, and her mouth opened once more. I'm pregnant, she stated, the words erupting in a breathless torrent, a desperate cascade that seemed to tumble out of her before fear or doubt could reclaim their hold, before she could lose the fragile courage it took to utter them. In that instant, the familiar, cozy kitchen transformed, shrinking infinitesimally, yet simultaneously expanding into a depressive, cavernous silence that swallowed every other sound, rendering the space both suffocatingly small and deafeningly quiet. It was a paradox, a physical manifestation of the mental shock. My mind, assaulted by this dizzying confluence of revelations, struggled valiantly to reconcile two utterly seismic truths, the crushing weight of her discovery of my prolonged deceit, and the breathtaking, world-altering announcement that we were, against all odds, on the cusp of bringing a new life into this now-shattered world. Time itself seemed to warp, stretching mere seconds into an unbearable eternity, as neither of us dared to move, frozen in the crucible of these devastating confessions. The cheerful, insistent beep of the coffee maker, signaling the completion of its brewing cycle, pierced the oppressive stillness, a stark reminder of the mundane world continuing outside our personal maelstrom. Yet its sound went unheeded, neither of us stirred to silence its mechanical pronouncement. We remained rooted to our small kitchen chairs, the unassuming table suddenly transformed into an altar bearing the crushing, almost physical weight of our shared reality. The accumulated burden of 2 years of insidious lies, the bewildering, joyous yet terrifying prospect of a pregnancy. The gaping chasm of trust so carelessly shattered, all of it coalesced into an almost tangible mass. It loomed between us, an impenetrable, unscalable wall constructed of deceit and shattered expectations, a silent, imposing barrier that now demanded our immediate, desperate attention. How would we ever hope to surmount its unforgiving height, or find the strength to dismantle it, brick by painful brick? With a weary, almost desperate gesture, she buried her face in both hands as if to physically obscure the unbearable reality of our situation, or perhaps to simply hold herself together. It was then, in that moment of profound stillness, that my gaze snagged on the chipped nail polish adorning her fingers, a stark, almost jarring detail. This was a woman who prided herself on meticulous presentation, whose nails were always impeccably groomed. The chipped lacquer was a silent, eloquent testament to how utterly this crisis had unraveled her, how completely it had stripped away her usual careful vigilance. We need time to think. Her voice emerged, muffled and strained, from behind her shielding hands, a plea for reprieve from the immediate, overwhelming deluge of emotion. I nodded slowly, a silent agreement, even though her hands still obscured her view of my face. Yeah, I concurred, my voice barely a whisper. We absolutely do. The remaining hours of the morning unfolded in a fragile, agonizing dance. We moved through the apartment not as partners, but as two spectral beings, orbiting each other with extreme, almost painful caution, each step deliberate, each glance fleeting. It was as if we were both crafted from the thinnest, most delicate glass, acutely aware that the slightest inadvertent brush, the merest bump, could send us shattering into irreparable fragments. She retreated to the shower, seeking solace or perhaps simply a temporary escape from the suffocating air, while I, in a daze, mechanically tidied the kitchen. I found myself washing her coffee cup not once, not twice, but 3 times, my mind so thoroughly preoccupied with the morning's bombshells that I barely registered the repetitive motion. My focus utterly fragmented. As twilight draped its somber cloak over the apartment, we found ourselves gravitating inexplicably back to the kitchen, drawn by some invisible magnetic force to the very place where our world had fractured. It seemed neither of us could conceive of anywhere else to be a poignant reflection of our shared disorientation. It was then, in the stark, unforgiving light of our broken trust, that I finally unburdened myself, revealing the agonizing secret of all those countless times her parents had verbally eviscerated me, their hateful barbs cloaked and her meticulously crafted, utterly false translations of compliments and endearments. Your mom, I began, my voice steady despite the tremor deep within. She called me a loser, a pathetic excuse for a man, at least 50 times, perhaps more, during our visits. I watched her face, searching for any flicker of recognition, any hint of understanding. And your dad, I continued, the words now imbued with the full weight of years of suppressed resentment, he told you, right to your face, in Italian, that I was utterly worthless, that you were squandering your precious life on someone like me. Her eyes, previously shadowed with a quiet sorrow, now flew wide open, blossoming with a profound, almost childlike shock. It was a look that conveyed a chilling realization, as if the true, devastating impact of those fake translations, the insidious cruelty hidden beneath her carefully constructed facade, had never truly dawned on her until this very moment. My own convoluted, deeply flawed reasoning, which had convinced me that if you didn't understand it, it couldn't hurt you, suddenly seemed monstrously naive, even laughable in its absurdity. Yet, there was absolutely nothing humorous about the raw, exposed pain now throbbing between us. It was a bitter, gut-wrenching irony. She lowered her gaze, fixing it on her hands clasped tightly on the tabletop, a posture of profound shame and resignation. Sometimes I even laughed along with them, she confessed, her voice shrinking to a barely audible whisper laden with self-reproach. It was just easier. Easier than constantly battling against their relentless negativity. They're my parents, and I desperately wanted them to accept you, to like you. But they refused to even give you a real chance, so I just went along with it. Her raw, unvarnished honesty, though it twisted a new knot of pain in my gut, also brought with it a strange, almost unsettling relief. At last, a sliver of unadulterated truth from her, a fragile foundation amidst the ruins of our shared past. We lingered there, suspended in a heavy silence, for what felt like an indeterminate stretch of time before a semblance of practical thought returned. We decided, with a shared, unspoken weariness, that we needed a finite period to weeks to dissect the wreckage and discern a path forward. About us, she enunciated with chilling precision, and about the baby, her clarification a subtle, almost accusatory reminder, as if I could possibly, in this seismic shift of reality, have overlooked either monumental facet of our crisis. A profound uncertainty hung in the air. Neither of us possessed a glimmer of hope or conviction that we could mend the deep, festering rift that now yawned between us. Yet, an undeniable, urgent imperative had emerged. With a child's innocent life inextricably woven into our tangled fate, we were compelled, by an unbreakable bond of responsibility, to at least attempt to navigate this treacherous terrain. As night descended, we navigated our usual evening routine with a chilling, almost uncanny precision, moving with the detached, methodical grace of automatons programmed for the mundane tasks of brushing teeth and washing faces. It was a hollow pantomime of normalcy. We stood side by side at the bathroom sink, our reflections mirrored in the glass, yet an invisible, unbridgeable chasm seemed to stretch between us, making it feel as though we occupied entirely separate realities, distinct rooms within the same suffocating space. She retreated to the bedroom, claiming the familiar sanctuary of our bed, while I resigned myself once more to the cold, unforgiving leather of the living room couch. Its chill seeping through the thin fabric of my t-shirt, a tangible reminder of our fractured intimacy. From the quiet solitude of the living room, I could discern the faint rustling sounds of her restless movements in the bedroom, a silent confirmation that sleep, that elusive bomb, was eluding her as completely as it was eluding me. The entire apartment, usually a haven of shared warmth, now felt simultaneously to quiet, every absence of sound amplifying the void between us, and yet, paradoxically, to loud. Each minuscule creak or sigh of the building magnified into an intrusive, almost menacing crescendo in the oppressive darkness. And so, the stark, unsettling truth unfurled itself, for to grueling years, I had meticulously maintained the pretense of linguistic ignorance, feigning incomprehension even as her parents hurled their acidic insults directly into my face, their words dripping with disdain. What kind of profound, self-destructive commitment does it take to sustain such an elaborate deception? A lie of this magnitude, woven so intricately into the fabric of our daily lives, begged a haunting question. What twisted logic had convinced me that this painstaking, protracted charade was somehow preferable to the fleeting discomfort of simply revealing the truth, honestly and openly, from the very beginning? Had I truly believed it would protect us, or merely shield myself from an uncomfortable confrontation? The following morning, I rose before she did, the weight of sleeplessness and guilt pressing down on me, an almost physical ache, driven by an urgent, unsettling need for reckoning. I rummaged through the desk drawer until my fingers closed around a forgotten notebook, a blank slate ironically awaiting the chronicle of my undoing. With a trembling hand, I began to painstakingly record every single instance, every minute transgression, every deliberate omission where I had meticulously concealed my fluency in Italian from her. It was a brutal self-exorcism, each entry a fresh cut. There was the time she'd innocently asked me to order our meal at that bustling trattoria, and I, feigning confusion, had merely gestured vaguely at the menu, a silent charade of ignorance. Then, the countless times her mother had sneered, calling me an idiot or good-for-nothing directly to my face, only for me to offer a vacant smile and a polite, unwitting nod, playing the part of the oblivious foreigner. And how could I forget the biting sting when her father, convinced I understood nothing, casually told her in Italian that she could do so much better, that I was beneath her, while I With practiced indifference, pretended to be engrossed in my phone, scrolling aimlessly through phantom notifications to avoid his gaze. Page after agonizing page filled swiftly with these meticulously detailed accounts of my deceptions, each one, in retrospect, seeming more trivial, more pathetically desperate, and profoundly stupider than the last. It was a stark, unflinching inventory of my moral failures. By the time my hand cramped and the pen ran dry, a staggering 12 pages of lies, scribbled in my hurried, messy handwriting, lay before me. Seeing them, stark and undeniable, in black and white, laid bare the terrifying magnitude of my deceit. It was a crushing, almost unbearable realization. How many fleeting opportunities I had been given, countless invitations to simply confess the truth, to reclaim my integrity, and how. With each agonizing instance, I had callously, irrevocably, squandered every single one. That evening, as the shadows lengthened and the silence of the apartment once again grew heavy with unspoken fears, the front door finally creaked open, and Ariana stepped inside. Her presence a potent mixture of dread and fragile hope. She entered the living room, her own notebook clutched in her hand like a precious, heavy secret, and settled across from me on the sleek, low coffee table. The air still hummed with the quiet intensity of her earlier hours spent secluded in the bedroom, meticulously filling pages. Evidence of her tireless dedication smudged her handwork trails of ink like tiny battle scars from a prolonged literary skirmish. With a deliberate, almost ritualistic gesture, she pushed the notebook across the polished surface towards me. My gaze fell upon the 8 pages within, each one a testament to her meticulous nature, filled edge to edge with tiny, impeccably neat handwriting. It was a chronicle, painstakingly detailed, of every subtle slight, every overt jab. And there it was, laid bare for both of us to see, a stark, undeniable record. Every single instance, etched in careful script, where she had chosen to laugh along with their cruel jokes, a complicit chuckle that stung far worse than any direct insult. Instead of rising to my defense, every agonizing dinner party, stretched thin with forced smiles, where she had silently permitted them to relentlessly compare me to Marco, her impossibly perfect ex-boyfriend, without uttering a single word of protest. Every translated lie she told, delivered with a practiced ease, ostensibly to spare my feelings, yet effectively granting them permission to systematically tear me apart, piece by agonizing piece. I vividly recalled the searing moment her mother, with a dismissive wave of her hand, had casually labeled me pathetic, and Ariana had merely offered a small, almost imperceptible shrug, as if confirming the damning assessment. Then there was the time her father, with a critical eye, had remarked that I dressed like a teenager and she, instead of refuting him, had quietly, devastatingly, agreed. It was a litany of all those pivotal, heartbreaking moments where she could have, should have, stood up for me, could have shielded me from their barbed words, but instead, she consistently, predictably, picked the path of least resistance, easy, cowardly route. We both sat there, silently transfixed, staring at our respective notebooks as if they were damning evidence carefully catalogued at a crime scene. Each page a testament to grievances both acknowledged and ignored. Neither of us, in the fog of our daily lives, had truly grasped the insidious depth of the problem, how truly dire things had become, until the raw, unvarnished truth was laid out. Written in our own hands, a wave of shared understanding, perhaps even regret, washed over us. She slowly reached over, her fingers brushing mine, and squeezed my hand for a brief, fragile second to silent acknowledgement, a tiny plea for understanding were just as quickly pulling back. The unspoken truth hung heavy in the air. We needed to inform our parents about the pregnancy. Yet the emotional chasm between us, still raw and aching from the revelations in our notebooks, was too wide to bridge right then, too fragile to face such a monumental task together. So we divided the burden, a temporary truce. She murmured that she would call her parents tomorrow, and I, with a knot tightening in my stomach, would call mine. The mere thought of those inevitable, fraught conversations sent a sickening pang through my gut, but the cold reality was undeniable. We couldn't postpone them any longer. The clock was ticking. The very next afternoon, while Ariana was at work, I gathered my courage and dialed my parents. My mom answered on the second ring, her voice bright and cheerful, brimming with typical maternal warmth that is, until she heard the uncharacteristic gravity in my own. Without preamble, I laid out the stark truth, everything about the pregnancy, the unexpected turn our lives had taken, and the devastating ripple effect my lie had had. Unraveling the already delicate fabric of my relationship with Ariana, a heavy silence followed my confession. Dad remained uncharacteristically quiet, absorbing the news, while Mom, ever the pragmatist, peppered me with a flurry of questions, the dates, doctor appointments, all the logistical details. But when I began to articulate the profound chasm that had opened between Ariana and me, detailing the extent of the damage, her cheerful composure fractured. I heard her voice catch, then dissolve into quiet sobs on the other end of the line. Finally, Dad, his voice imbued with a quiet disappointment that cut deeper than any shout, spoke up. He confessed they were indeed disappointed in my deception, but in the same breath, reassured me they would support whatever decision Ariana and I ultimately made. Mom, still choked up, apologized not once, but 3 more times, for her almost disastrous slip-up at dinner, the comment that had nearly exposed my secret. She kept repeating, with a self-flagellating cadence, that she should have known better, and I could practically hear her beating herself up about it. The sound of her guilt palpable even through the phone line. By Friday, the weight of the impending appointment hung heavy between us. Our first prenatal checkup had arrived, a stark marker in this new, uncertain chapter, and we drove to the clinic enveloped in a complete, suffocating silence. The waiting room, a vibrant tableau of expectant joy, was filled with happy couples, their hands intertwined, their smiles wide, some affectionately rubbing burgeoning bellies, symbols of shared hope. In stark contrast, Ariana and I sat 2 chairs apart, a visible chasm between us, both pretending with practiced apathy to be engrossed in the well-worn, dog-eared magazines, shielding ourselves from the emotional resonance of the room. When the nurse, with a cheerful call, summoned us back, we rose and walked down the long, sterile hallway, not like partners embarking on a new journey, but like strangers who, by mere happenstance, were simply headed in the same direction, our shoulders never quite touching. The initial consultation was a blur of impersonal medical routine. The nurse, efficient and detached, performed all the basic checks and measurements, while we, with strained politeness, provided answers to questions about family medical history. Each reply feeling distant, disconnected. Then, the moment arrived, the doctor entered, pushing a bulky ultrasound machine, its screen a dark, expectant void. He squeezed a cool, viscous gel onto Ariana's stomach, a sudden, cold intrusion, and the room plunged into darkness, save for the faint glow emanating from the monitor. At first, it was just a chaotic swirl of static, an indecipherable dance of weird shadows shifting and morphing like abstract art. Our breaths hitched, suspended in the silent tension. And then, without warning, we heard it. A sound unlike any other, a rapid, rhythmic whoosh, whoosh, whoosh sound like a tiny, determined train racing through a subterranean tunnel, the heartbeat. It was undeniable, unmistakable, a powerful, insistent rhythm. In that instant, pure instinct took over. Ariana, without a conscious thought, blindly reached out and grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly fierce. And then, simultaneously, uncontrollably, we both started crying. In that singular, overwhelming moment, with the world outside our little bubble still in chaotic disarray, everything else seemed to fade, to fall apart, yet that tiny, persistent heartbeat, that rhythmic whoosh, whoosh was vibrantly, profoundly real. It was strong, and it was unequivocally, breathtakingly, ours. The doctor, sensing the shift, printed out several pictures, those precious first glimpses, and we each took copies, clutching them like sacred talismans. Walking back to the car, the silence between us remained unbroken by words. But somehow, imperceptibly, the emotional distance that had separated us before felt a little less vast, the chasm a little less daunting. That weekend, the weight of unspoken truths became unbearable, an undeniable pressure. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I could not put it off any longer. The time for reckoning with Ariana's parents had arrived. With Ariana seated beside me on the couch, her presence a silent anchor, I dialed their number. Her father answered, his voice a familiar gruffness. But before he could even utter a polite hello, I began to speak, not in English, but in perfect, fluid Italian. The words flowed effortlessly, a weapon honed by years of silent observation. I told him, with a calm clarity that belied the tremor in my hands, that I had understood every single word they had said about me for the past 2 long, excruciating years. Every cutting insult, every veiled joke, every insidious comparison to Marco, their golden boy. The line went utterly, unnervingly silent. I could distinctly hear the faint, shallow sound of his breathing on the other end, a telltale sign of his shock, but he remained mute, frozen in disbelief, for what felt like an eternity, almost 30 full seconds. Then, abruptly, her mom snatched the phone, her voice a rapid-fire volley of furious Italian questions, each one sharper than the last. How long had I known the language, she demanded, her tone laced with accusation. Why did I lie to them? What kind of person does something so deceptive, so manipulative? Ariana, caught squarely in the crossfire, sat utterly frozen between us, her face a mask of bewildered anguish, clearly unsure whose side to take, whose anger to placate. Her mom, her voice rising in pitch, then issued an ultimatum, demanding that we come to dinner immediately to discuss this. My voice, though, remained steady. I calmly affirmed that we would come, but I added, with an edge of steel, that things were going to be profoundly different from now on. A bitter, mocking laugh crackled through the phone line. We'll see about that, she sneered, her tone a gauntlet thrown. After I finally hung up, the tenuous peace between Ariana and me shattered, igniting into our first truly raw, unvarnished fight about the upcoming dinner. Ariana, her protective instincts flaring, immediately insisted that she would handle all the talking, determined to shield me from the full brunt of their expected fury. She knew, perhaps better than anyone, how vicious, how relentlessly cutting, her parents could be when they felt betrayed, their words like poison darts. But I vehemently refused, my voice firm, uncompromising. Absolutely not, I declared. I've been silent, a passive target, for 2 agonizing years, enduring their scorn and contempt. This time, I am going to speak for myself, she persisted, her voice laced with desperation, arguing that they would undoubtedly listen to her better, that her words would carry more weight. And that, I retorted, the frustration bubbling over, is precisely the entire, fundamental problem. You've spent our entire relationship managing them, constantly appeasing their whims and diffusing their anger, instead of ever truly standing up to them. Establishing boundaries, we volleyed back and forth for a 10, exhausting our voices growing progressively louder, our frustrations mounting with each unresolved point. Finally, after a heated impasse, we arrived at a shaky compromise. I would lead the conversation, setting the tone, but she would be empowered to jump in if things spiraled too far. If the atmosphere became too volatile or heated. Neither of us, however, felt any real sense of relief or satisfaction from the uneasy truce. It was a compromise born of exhaustion, not genuine agreement. The dinner, a looming dark cloud, arrived 3 days later, and my hands, betraying my outward calm, were visibly trembling. As we approached their imposing front door, it swung open before we could even knock. Her mom stood there, her face a rigid mask, not bothering with a greeting. Her eyes narrowed with an unmasked hostility. She merely turned and led us, in chilling silence, to the dining room, where her father already sat at the head of the table, his arms crossed over his chest, his posture a defiant barrier. I took my seat, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and without a moment's hesitation, plunged directly into speaking Italian, my voice clear and steady despite my internal turmoil. I declared, with an unyielding conviction, that the mockery stopped now, unequivocally. There would be no more demeaning comparisons to ex-boyfriends, no more thinly veiled insults aimed at my job, my family, or my personal interests. I laid out my terms with deliberate precision. If they truly desired to be an active, loving part of their grandchild's life, then they needed to extend me the basic, fundamental respect I deserved. Her mother, her face contorting with indignation, tried to interrupt, a sharp, angry retort forming on her lips, but I simply held her gaze, refusing to yield, and pressed on. One acknowledged my own responsibility for the deception, for having lied to them, but I immediately countered that their consistent, sustained cruelty, their relentless undermining of me, was utterly inexcusable. Ariana, her own voice quivering with a mixture of fear and newfound resolve, bravely backed me up. She told them, her eyes brimming with ench tears, that she was profoundly tired of being perpetually stuck in the middle, caught between their warring factions. She pleaded with them to accept me, or at the very least, to cease their active, destructive efforts to undermine our relationship. Her dad, finally breaking his stony silence, spoke, his voice heavy with perceived injury. He accused us of having humiliated them by keeping such a significant secret. Her mom, quick to echo his sentiment, added, with a cutting edge, that trust was earned, not demanded, the conversation, a frustrating, circular dance of accusation and defense, continued like this for 2 arduous hours, each side reiterating their points, neither truly listening. Finally, emotionally drained, we rose to leave. Nothing felt truly resolved, no grand reconciliation achieved, save for one fragile, tentative agreement, a commitment to try family counseling, a tiny glimmer of hope in the vast, unresolved landscape of our fractured relationships. In the car afterward, we lingered in the silent confinement of the driveway, the engine a phantom hum in the late afternoon. Neither of us was ready to face the quiet emptiness of home, not after the emotional wreckage we just navigated. It felt like standing on the precipice of a vast, unknown canyon. We began a harrowing recitation, a cataloging of the myriad specific wounds we'd inflicted upon each other. My voice, raw and raspy, confessed to the carefully constructed lies I'd woven over time, subtle distortions that had, unbeknownst to me, formed a suffocating net. Ariana, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond the windshield, recalled the stinging time she'd laughed along with her parents' barbed jokes about me, each chuckle a tiny pinprick of betrayal. We acknowledged the countless moments we'd both chosen the path of least resistance, the comfortable detour around uncomfortable truths, prioritizing fleeting ease over the bedrock of honesty. Every betrayal, every quiet disappointment, every instance of emotional negligence came pouring out of us, a torrent of grievances long suppressed. It was an inventory of a love slowly, painstakingly dismantled. Eventually, the weight of our admissions became unbearable, and we both dissolved into racking sobs in the deepening gloom of that car. Our tears weren't just for the specific hurts we dealt, the cruel words or the cowardice, but for something far grander and more profound, the phantom limb of the relationship we thought we had. The idealized version, carefully curated and fiercely protected, was irrevocably gone. Could this chasm ever be bridged? Could we possibly salvage anything from the ruins? Or was it too late to even contemplate building something new from the scattered fragments? The uncertainty was a heavy, suffocating blanket. When we finally, reluctantly, made our way inside, the air between us was thick with unspoken anguish. Ariana, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen, articulated her need for space, a quiet demand that echoed the cavernous void suddenly present in our lives. She wanted to seek refuge at her parents' house for a few nights, a request imbued with a bitter irony that neither of us missed, given their integral role in our shared deceit. Yet, despite the sting of it, I moved on autopilot, helping her pack a small bag. We navigated the tight confines of the apartment with a fragile precision, like two porcelain figures teetering on the brink, terrified that a simple brush of arms might shatter us both completely. I carried her suitcase, surprisingly light, to her car, the silence between us punctuated only by the distant hum of traffic. I stood there, rooted to the spot, watching the tail lights of her car recede into the encroaching darkness, a crimson flicker vanishing from sight. The apartment, once a vibrant sanctuary, now felt like a hollow shell, its silence too profound, too heavy. Without her presence, the very air seemed to thin, making it difficult to breathe. I attempted to immerse myself in work, a desperate bid for normalcy, but my mind, a fractured kaleidoscope of regrets and fears, refused to cooperate. The meticulously crafted presentation, due days ago, lay open on my laptop screen, its colorful slides mocking my paralysis. I simply stared at it, the words blurring, the intricate data meaningless. The deadline, a once pressing urgency, came and went like an unheeded whisper. I submitted nothing. On Monday morning, an ominous email from my supervisor materialized in my inbox. A stark, clinical request to discuss recent performance. It was just another problem, a fresh, stinging wound added to the already towering, teetering pile that seemed to grow exponentially higher with each passing day. That meeting with my supervisor unfolded precisely as anticipated, a slow-motion car crash of professional failure. Her expression, usually composed, was now a mask of measured disappointment. She pulled up my recent performance metrics on her screen, the glowing display brutally illuminating my shortcomings. A sea of red marks screamed missed deadlines, incomplete projects, and a worrying dip in productivity. My hands, clammy and trembling involuntarily, clasped beneath the table as I stammered out a half-hearted explanation, carefully omitting the devastating personal details that were actually shredding my focus. With a sigh that conveyed both resignation and firmness, she placed me on a formal improvement plan, an official document outlining a stark path to redemption, complete with weekly check-ins starting immediately. My options, I knew, were non-existent. I nodded, a mute acknowledgement of my precarious position, and affixed my signature to the paperwork, the crisp sound of the pen a final, inescapable echo of my predicament. My job, and perhaps even my self-worth, hung by the thinnest of threads. When I finally stumbled home that afternoon, the apartment's silence was a familiar, unwelcome companion. I sat at my laptop, its cool metal a stark contrast to my internal turmoil, and opened a blank document. The white expanse of the screen felt like an intimidating canvas. The cursor, a tiny, pulsing vertical line, blinked at me relentlessly for a full 20 minutes, a silent, rhythmic challenge to my resolve. And then a tremor of defiance, a nascent spark of courage, stirred within me. I began typing, not in English, but in Italian. Every word, every syllable, felt foreign yet strangely liberating, an almost physical ache after having repressed the language, a crucial part of my identity, for so long. I wrote about the dizzying euphoria of meeting Ariana, a story of instantaneous connection, swiftly followed by the insidious creep of one small lie, a seemingly insignificant omission that had metastasized into 2 years of agonizing deception. I painstakingly recounted the excruciating experience of sitting beside her, listening as her parents, their voices dripping with contempt, openly mocked me, while Ariana, caught in the crossfire, translated their cruelties into the very language I understood perfectly. It was a double betrayal, a twisting knife. I laid bare my own gut-wrenching cowardice, my shameful inability to speak up, to defend myself, to halt the escalating deceit sooner. The letter, a cathartic deluge of suppressed emotions and unsaid truths, swelled to 3 pages, a sprawling testament to everything I desperately wanted to articulate for months. I poured out the insidious ache of being constantly, cruelly compared to Marco, their idealized vision of a son-in-law. I described the specific, agonizing vignettes of watching Ariana, my partner, laugh along with their demeaning jokes, each peal of laughter a fresh wound. I acknowledged my undeniable fault, the initial lie that had set this whole tragic drama in motion, but with a newfound, resolute clarity, I asserted that their relentless cruelty was simply not, and could never be justified. My fingers, once hesitant, flew across the keyboard with a newfound speed and fluidity as the Italian flowed, unimpeded and raw. Writing in my native tongue felt like shedding a ridiculously heavy coat I'd been forced to wear for far too long, its oppressive weight finally lifted. A palpable sense of liberation, a cleansing rush, washed over me. With a click, I saved the document, then reached for my phone, a brief, hopeful message dispatched to Ariana. I've written something for your parents. The next morning, Ariana appeared at my door, a peace offering of coffee in hand, her eyes betraying a profound weariness. I gestured towards my laptop, the screen displaying the 3 pages of raw, unvarnished truth. She sank onto the couch, her gaze fixed, and began to read, slowly, meticulously, absorbing each word. As her eyes traversed paragraph after paragraph, her expression subtly shifted, a complex tableau of recognition, pain, and perhaps a flicker of understanding. She pointed to a particular section, her finger resting gently on a phrase, and suggested a softer wording, a more empathetic articulation. I made the adjustment, and she offered a slight, acknowledging nod. For the next 2 hours, we engaged in an intricate dance of words, a meticulous back and forth over phrases, nuances, and tones. She became my guide, helping me to articulate my perspective without resorting to direct attacks, without further alienating her parents. I toned down parts that felt too incendiary, too steeped in raw anger. She, in turn, gently corrected my grammar in places where my Italian, long suppressed, had grown undeniably rusty. In that shared endeavor, refining our joint truth, we worked together with a synchronicity and understanding that had been conspicuously absent for weeks. When the final period was placed, we had crafted a letter that conveyed every essential truth, every deeply felt emotion, without once descending into outright cruelty. With a sense of quiet accomplishment, she printed it out. We both signed our names at the bottom, a tangible commitment to the words we had forged together. That afternoon, my own parents, summoned by a cryptic, urgent call, drove over, a palpable air of concern radiating from them, to talk about everything. Mom, ever the nurturer, arrived bearing a steaming pot of homemade soup, a poignant, almost absurd gesture, as if a comforting broth could somehow mend the gaping fissures in our lives. Dad sat stiffly on the edge of the couch, visibly uncomfortable with the raw emotional landscape, yet resolute in his determination to offer whatever help he could. They gently probed, asking what we needed from them, both financially and emotionally, offering an unconditional scaffold of support. It was a stark contrast to other family dynamics. I found myself thinking, with a cynical twist, about the absurdly meticulous conflict logs I'd heard about in other relationships how her parents, for instance, just happened to have 8 pages of accumulated insults ready to counter my own hypothetical 12 pages of acknowledged lies. There was something profoundly unsettling, almost theatrical, about these perfectly balanced notebooks of grievances. It felt far too neat, too organized, for the messy, unpredictable, and often illogical currents of real-life relationships. Mom, her voice soft with a wisdom born of experience, shared a poignant anecdote from their own first year of marriage, a period fraught with peril when Dad had unexpectedly lost his job, pushing them to the brink of divorce. Dad, in turn, spoke candidly about how they had meticulously learned to communicate more effectively, painstakingly rebuilding their connection through the challenging yet invaluable process of counseling. Their words, delivered with a quiet conviction, resonated deeply. Every relationship, no matter how strong, faces monumental tests, they emphasized, and what truly matters is the conscious, unwavering choice to work through them together. Mom reached out, her hand gently enveloping mine, a comforting anchor in the storm, assuring me of their unwavering support. Whatever path we ultimately chose. Dad, his voice imbued with a newfound tenderness, then added a revelation that sent a jolt through me. They would love their grandchild, he affirmed, no matter what transpired between Ariana and me. The words hung in the air, weighty with implication. They stayed for a generous 3 hours, offering not just advice drawn from their own marital journey, but, more importantly, a safe space where they simply listened, absorbing our fractured narrative. After they finally departed, leaving behind a faint scent of their reassuring presence, Ariana, her jaw set with a quiet resolve, set up her laptop for a video call. It was time to face her own parents. I sat beside her, a silent sentinel, as the connection flickered to life and her parents' faces materialized on the screen, their features a mix of anticipation and everyday concern. Ariana drew a deep, fortifying breath, her chest rising and falling visibly, before dropping the seismic announcement she was pregnant. Her mother's eyes immediately widened, morphing into luminous saucers of incredulity, and she erupted into a rapid-fire torrent of baby names and nursery colors, her excitement a dazzling, almost overwhelming force. Her father, ever the pragmatist, abruptly interjected, his voice cutting through his wife's joyful pronouncements, with a barrage of pointed questions about our financial stability and our current living situation. Ariana, demonstrating remarkable composure, answered each query calmly and deliberately, her voice steady. I sat beside her, understanding every single word, the Italian flowing clearly into my ears, yet I maintained a deliberate, almost defensive, silence. Her mother, recovering from her initial burst of excitement, then inquired about wedding plans, to which Ariana, with a carefully modulated tone, replied that we were figuring things out. Her father's face, a roadmap of emotions, tightened perceptibly, his brow furrowing as the realization dawned that things between us were far from solidified. The call, a tense tightrope walk between elation and profound anxiety, stretched on for an hour, her parents oscillating wildly between bursts of excitement for the grandchild and waves of concern for our precarious future. After we finally disconnected, Ariana looked utterly drained, the effort of managing their turbulent reactions having clearly taken its toll. She went to her parents' house for dinner that night, leaving me alone in the too quiet apartment. Around 11 p.m., my phone rang, its sudden jingle startling in the stillness. It was Ariana, her voice choked with sobs. She recounted how her parents had spent the entire dinner relentlessly telling her she was making a grave mistake by staying with me. The ghost of Marco, her seemingly perfect ex-fiance, was resurrected once more, held up as the ideal, the man who would have proposed immediately. Her mother, her voice laced with stern conviction, had asserted that the baby deserved parents who were stable and committed, casting a shadow of doubt over our capacity. Her father, ever the cynic, had questioned whether I'd even stick around once things got hard, a barb aimed directly at my perceived weakness. Ariana was sobbing so uncontrollably, her words barely discernible through the torrent of tears, that I struggled to piece together her anguish. She insisted, through her broken cries, that she knew her parents were wrong, that their judgments were unfair, but their insidious doubt, their doubt was beginning to fester. The relentless pressure and cutting remarks were deeply affecting her spirit, chipping away at her resilience. A profound sense of helplessness washed over her. She simply couldn't fathom how to bridge the chasm of misunderstanding, how to convey to them the sheer effort we were pouring into our situation, how desperately we were trying our best. I gently urged her to put an end to the ordeal, to come home where we could face it, and, more importantly, figure it out together, whatever it might be. The following morning, an unexpected text buzzed on my phone. Her father, cutting straight to the chase, requested a private meeting, just the two of us. A clear sign of the escalating gravity of the situation. A neutral, bustling coffee shop downtown was chosen as our rendezvous point that afternoon, the kind of place where private conversations often blend into the general din of daily life, yet held the potential for uncomfortable intimacy. I arrived ahead of schedule, deliberately selecting a secluded corner table, a quiet eddy away from the main current of patrons, subconsciously seeking a shield against prying eyes or unsolicited attention for the difficult conversation ahead. He materialized precisely 5 minutes after our agreed time, his arrival marked not by an apology, but by a solemn, almost unreadable expression etched upon his face, a mask of grave determination that immediately set the tone. Without preamble or the usual social niceties, he ordered a single black coffee stark, unadorned, much like his demeanor, and then settled into the chair directly opposite me. The absence of a handshake a palpable omission, a silent declaration of the chasm between us. Then, without a perceptible shift in posture, he began to speak, his voice a low, resonant rumble, his words flowing entirely in Italian stark. Deliberate choice designed perhaps to assert control or simply to express the raw, unfiltered anxieties he harbored for his daughter. He spoke of a lifetime of relentless labor, of countless sacrifices meticulously made, all channeled into forging a path of boundless opportunities for Ariana. Opportunities he clearly viewed as a sacred legacy. His gravest concern, he articulated with unwavering conviction, was the prospect of her settling a word heavy with disappointment for a partner who might fail to provide adequately to sustain the lifestyle and future he believed she deserved. He even conceded, with a slight dip of his head, that the constant, stinging comparisons to Marco, her successful ex-fiancé, were indeed unfair, yet he insisted these critiques stemmed not from malice but from a profound, if perhaps misguided, desire for only the absolute best for his beloved daughter, a familiar paternal refrain. And then, a universal truth, or at least a deeply ingrained belief, escaped his lips. Fathers, he declared, his gaze unwavering. Never truly believe anyone is good enough for their daughters. Was it a confession, a lament, or a challenge? Throughout his monologue, I maintained a stoic silence, my expression carefully neutral, even as certain barbs pierced through my composure, igniting a slow, simmering anger that I diligently kept locked behind an impassive facade. The moment his voice trailed off, leaving the air thick with unspoken expectations, I countered, my response delivered not only in fluent Italian, but with an unhesitating directness, clearly articulating my own unwavering stance. I looked him squarely in the eye and stated, unequivocally, that my love for Ariana remained absolute, enduring, and undiminished, even amidst the swirling tempest of our present difficulties. And perhaps most crucially, I vowed that I would never abandon our child, that my commitment transcended any personal strife or potential breakdown of our relationship, a foundational promise. A slow, deliberate nod was his only immediate reaction, followed by a fleeting, almost imperceptible flicker of surprise in his eyes, a sense, born not just from my unexpected fluency in his native tongue, but also from the sheer, unvarnished directness of my words. We talked for another hour, the initial tension slowly dissipating as we cautiously navigated the conversational currents, eventually finding small, tentative points of agreement that offered a glimmer of hope. That evening, the air thick with lingering revelations, Ariana herself brought up what felt like an exhaustive inventory of the tests she'd put me through. Each one a desperate attempt to catch me inadvertently revealing my understanding of Italian. She meticulously recounted at least 30 distinct attempts to expose what she perceived as my secret, a betrayal hidden in plain sight. Her confession was laced with an almost tragic disbelief as she admitted to feeling utterly crazy, constantly scrutinizing my every word, my every reaction, relentlessly searching for undeniable proof of my deception. She realized, with a heavy heart, that her relentless focus on catching me lying had ironically caused her to completely forget to actually build trust between us. Her voice, usually so steady, cracked noticeably when she admitted the extent to which she'd become consumed by paranoia and suspicion, turning our relationship into a constant, grueling interrogation. She confessed how utterly exhausting it had been perpetually analyzing my reactions to everything, deciphering every nuance of my behavior for hidden meanings. I told her, my voice gentle but firm, that I understood precisely why she felt compelled to test me, given the extraordinary and challenging circumstances we found ourselves in. In that moment of raw honesty, we both acknowledged the immense, precious energy we had squandered on the intricate dance of deception and the corrosive weight of suspicion. Just 3 days later, a pivotal step in our journey, we had our first counseling appointment with a therapist specializing in couples therapy. The therapist's office was thoughtfully arranged, featuring 2 comfortable chairs facing each other, a silent invitation to open dialogue, with her own seat positioned discreetly off to the side. A neutral observer, she began by asking us to describe our main issues, providing a crucial ground rule: no interrupting each other. Ariana, her voice still tinged with residual hurt, went first, explaining the profound sense of betrayal she had felt about my lie, detailing the emotional ripple effects it had caused. When it was my turn, I articulated the deep hurt inflicted by her family's relentless mockery, and perhaps even more painfully, her own participation in those stinging remarks. The therapist, a picture of calm attention, took meticulous notes, periodically asking incisive follow-up questions about the recurring pattern she observed in our interactions. She gently yet firmly pointed out how we both, perhaps out of habit or fear, consistently chose the path of avoiding conflict rather than engaging in honest, direct communication. For our homework, she assigned us the task of practicing stating our needs directly, clearly, and without the immediate sting of accusations. We scheduled weekly sessions, leaving her office armed with tangible communication guidelines, a fragile yet hopeful roadmap to follow. The very next day, I met with my supervisor again, the weight of needing flexibility for impending medical appointments heavy on my mind, though I carefully avoided giving specifics. She reviewed the company policy on family leave and flexible arrangements with a meticulous eye. To my immense relief, she agreed to let me work from home 2 days a week, offering a much-needed lifeline. However, she also made it painstakingly clear that I was treading on thin ice with my performance plan. Any more missed deadlines, she cautioned, would unequivocally lead to termination. Irrespective of personal circumstances, I signed the new arrangement, a complex mix of gratitude and overwhelming stress swirling within me as I contemplated the daunting task of juggling everything. That weekend, in a move that felt both practical and profoundly unsettling, Ariana suggested we should proactively plan for the worst-case scenario. She pulled out a fresh legal pad and, with a grim determination, began writing headers for custody and finances. We then spent for long, emotionally draining hours meticulously creating a document neither of us ever truly wanted to use, a stark testament to the fragility of our present. We discussed, in chilling detail, who would have the baby on which specific days if we were to separate, mapping out a future we both prayed would never materialize. We calculated child support based on our current salaries, the numbers feeling stark and unforgiving. We wrote down crucial decisions about medical care and educational paths, each sentence feeling like a reluctant acceptance of potential failure, yet we grimly kept going. Pushing through the discomfort, we agreed on the equitable splitting of holidays and birthdays if such a separation became necessary, trying to imagine a world where joy was divided. We even decided on specific communication methods for co-parenting logistics, attempting to create order out of anticipated chaos. By the time we finished, we were both utterly drained, exhausted by the sheer act of imagining such a fractured future. We carefully placed the document in a folder, sealing it with a silent, desperate hope that we would, indeed, never need to open it again. 3 days later, holding our breath, we drove to the hospital for the much-anticipated 12-week ultrasound appointment. The waiting room was packed with visibly happy couples, their hands clasped together, radiating an easy joy that felt alien to us as we sat with an almost symbolic space between us on the cold plastic chairs. When they called our names, the sound echoing through the sterile hall, we walked down the corridor without touching, both of us staring intently at the floor tiles, avoiding each other's gaze. The technician, with a professional calm, squeezed cold, slightly sticky gel onto Ariana's stomach and began moving the wand around, her eyes fixed on the black and white screen as we watched. Mesmerized, then suddenly, there it was, an undeniable presence, this tiny, dynamic person, doing flips and moving their arms with an almost balletic grace, like they were dancing for us. The technician, her voice warm, pointed out the flickering heartbeat, the delicate curve of the spine, the unbelievably tiny fingers opening and closing, a miniature miracle. Without a moment's hesitation, without thinking or planning, I reached for Ariana's hand and she, with an equally instinctive reflex, grabbed mine back, her grip tight, almost desperate. We both had tears streaming silently down our faces, completely captivated, watching our baby move around like that. A profound, unifying moment. The technician, sensing the emotion, thoughtfully printed out pictures, and we walked to the car still holding hands, a simple, powerful touch. It was the first time we touched in weeks, a silent reconnection. Neither of us said anything about it, not a single word, but we didn't let go until we reached the parking lot, the shared warmth of comfort against the unspoken. The next weekend, in a tentative step toward mending familial bridges, we decided to try lunch with her parents at an Italian place downtown, a neutral territory for a potentially volatile encounter. We had agreed upon a new, non-negotiable rule before even stepping foot in the restaurant. No mockery in any language, period. But as soon as we sat down, looking at the menu, her mom, seemingly incapable of restraint, began almost immediately, remarking in Italian how marketing people just make up lies for a living. It was a direct, pointed jab at my profession. I responded instantly, my voice calm but firm in perfect, unaccented Italian, stating that I would appreciate her keeping her opinions about my career to herself, her face, usually so animated, went stark white, and the menu slipped from her stunned fingers. Her dad started to interject, to say something, but Ariana, quick and decisive, cut him off, her voice ringing with newfound authority, declaring, "We'd leave right now if they couldn't be respectful." The waiter, sensing the palpable tension, approached our table, and we ordered our meals in a weird, strained silence, the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. Her mom, seemingly undeterred or perhaps oblivious to the boundaries, tried again halfway through the meal, casually mentioning in Italian how my parents seemed simple when she'd seen their Facebook photos, another deeply personal and insulting barb. That was it. I put down my fork, the clang of metal against ceramic sharp in the quiet, and stood up. Ariana, without a moment's hesitation, stood up right beside me and, her voice resolute, stated we were leaving right now. Her mom started protesting, a flurry of Italian words. But Ariana was already shrugging on her coat, her movements deliberate and unwavering. We left cash on the table, a stark gesture of finality, and walked out while her parents sat there, utterly stunned and speechless. In the car, Ariana's hands were visibly shaking as she started to drive, the tremor a physical manifestation of the emotional upheaval. The engine. It was a monumental shift, a defiance I'd never witnessed in her before, and the visible effort, the trembling in her voice, the tight set of her jaw, it clearly cost her an immense emotional toll. The sheer bravery of it, I could literally feel it radiating from her. That very evening, almost as if a silent agreement had been forged in the crucible of that confrontation, we initiated what swiftly became our new, inviolable routine. After dinner, as the sky softened into twilight hues, we'd embark on deliberate walks around our neighborhood. Crucially, we'd leave our phones behind, intentionally severing the digital tether that so often distracts and demands. For a solid hour, we would simply walk, the rhythmic movement of our steps providing a unique kind of liberation. It allowed us to truly talk, without the often intense pressure of direct eye contact, which can sometimes feel like an interrogation when discussing sensitive topics. The initial few walks were predictably quiet, punctuated by hesitant glances and unspoken thoughts, but a fragile space was slowly, painstakingly being created. Then, gradually, like cracks appearing in a long-frozen pond, we began to open up. It was during our fourth walk, under the soft glow of streetlights, that I finally admitted my own hidden transgression. Last month, I confessed, the words tasting bitter on my tongue, after one of our really bad fights. I vented to my old college buddy about our problems over beers. The relief of saying it was immediate, yet the guilt still pricked. She reciprocated with her own painful disclosure, her voice barely a whisper. I cried to my sister on the phone, wondering if I could ever truly trust you again. The raw vulnerability in her admission hit me hard. Not long after, I confessed to an even darker secret how, in moments of utter despair following our most venomous arguments, I had compulsively looked at apartment listings online, a terrifying glimpse into a future without her. Her response, delivered with a shaky sigh, revealed a parallel journey to the brink. I packed a bag twice, she admitted, but I never actually left. We continued to walk, the familiar houses, and the same neighborhood dogs barking behind fences forming an unchanging backdrop to our internal tumult. With each circuit, we meticulously listed these small betrayals, the hidden wounds we had both carefully concealed. Each confession, though agonizing to hear, brought with it a strange, paradoxical sense of relief, much like the painful but necessary act of cleaning out an infected wound, expelling the poison. No matter how much it stings, in the hope of true healing. By the time we finally returned home, the physical and emotional exhaustion was palpable. We were drained, utterly spent. But in the quiet aftermath, the air between us felt perceptibly clearer, lighter, as if a dense fog had finally lifted. Monday morning, the professional world rudely intruded on our fragile truce. My supervisor's summons to her office felt less like a request and more like a sentence. The sterile environment, the stack of spreadsheets on her polished desk, instantly amplified my dread. There, laid out in cold, hard numbers, were all the quantifiable failures of the past month. Missed deadlines, client complaints meticulously logged about delayed responses, my performance metrics shamefully plummeting far below target, and the damning evidence of 2 crucial presentations I had simply failed to deliver. Her words, though measured, carried an undeniable sting. I understand you're navigating some personal issues, she began, her tone a polite but firm acknowledgement of our recent turmoil. But the company needs you functioning at full capacity. The stark reality of corporate expectations overriding personal crises couldn't have been clearer. She then formally presented me with a performance improvement plan PIP, a bureaucratic death knell for many careers, complete with weekly check-ins and stringent targets I absolutely had to hit. Failed to meet these within 60 days, she concluded, her gaze unwavering, and will have no choice but to let you go, as I numbly signed the paperwork. The weight of self-recrimination was immense. I knew, deep down, that I deserved this, a direct consequence of how utterly distracted and emotionally absent I had been. Walking back to my desk, the air in the office filled thick with unspoken judgment. Every glance, every hushed conversation, seemed to be about me, my career now metaphorically hanging by the thinnest of threads, visible to everyone. That very night, as if the universe hadn't offered enough challenges, Mariana's mother, with her characteristic blend of sneakiness and presumption, created a family group text. Without so much as a by your leave, she added me to the conversation. Her message, written entirely in Italian, detailed elaborate plans for a grand family reunion next month. This time, however, something shifted within me. I responded, naturally and for the very first time, in fluent Italian, politely declining the invitation. We won't be able to make it, I typed, a newfound assertiveness in my digital voice. Almost immediately, her father jumped in, his words bristling with barely concealed irritation. Why not? I explained, with a calm clarity that surprised even myself, that we needed space to focus on ourselves. The floodgates then opened. Her cousin began typing a lengthy retort, her uncle chimed in with his unsolicited opinion, and within moments, the entire family was dissecting our relationship in this public, digital forum. The irony of it all was almost comical. Here was Oriana's mother, undoubtedly believing herself to be incredibly shrewd, concocting this family group text and communicating solely in Italian, utterly oblivious to the fact that her secret weapon was entirely useless against me. I could read every single word she typed. Was she testing me, I wondered, or had she simply not caught on yet that her linguistic barrier, intended to exclude and control, was no barrier at all? At that pivotal moment, Ariana, her eyes flashing with a mix of frustration and resolve, snatched my phone. Her fingers flew across the screen, typing out a message that resonated with newfound strength. This, she declared to the entire family, is precisely why we need boundaries. The immediate backlash was swift and predictable. Her mom's name flashed on the screen as she called, but we simply let it ring. The incessant stream of texts continued throughout the entire evening, each notification a tiny, irritating jab until, in a joint act of self-preservation, we finally muted the conversation. 2 days later, as we were in the comfortable rhythm of making dinner, Ariana turned to me with an unexpected request. Her eyes, still holding a hint of the revelation from our previous walk, were serious. She wanted me to translate her parents' conversations in real time the next time we saw them, so she could finally hear, unfiltered and unbuffered, the exact words I had endured for so long. It was a brave request, a profound act of empathy and a desire for true understanding. That following Sunday, armed with this unspoken agreement, we went to her parents' house for coffee. It started subtly, innocuously enough. Her parents, almost immediately, began talking in Italian about how thin I looked. I translated, word for painful word, exactly what they were saying. Her mom then mused aloud, her tone tinged with a faint concern that masked a cutting judgment, that I probably couldn't afford food on my salary. I translated that too, watching Ariana's face, now beginning to lose its color, her expression a mix of disbelief and dawning horror. Her dad, not to be outdone, then casually interjected, at least Marco, referring to some family acquaintance, had muscle definition. I continued to translate every insidious comment, every barbed observation, feeling a strange mix of vindication and sorrow as I watched Ariana's complexion grow steadily paler. They nitpicked about my posture, my choice of clothes, even the way I held my coffee cup. Nothing was too trivial to escape their critical gaze. Every single excruciating word was meticulously translated until, finally, Ariana could take no more. Her voice, though strained, cut through the incessant Italian chatter, telling them, firmly, to stop. By the time we managed to make our departure, she was openly weeping, the full, crushing weight of what I had quietly endured for 2 solid years finally sinking in. In the car, she was inconsolable, her apologies pouring out, a torrent of remorse. I had no idea, she kept repeating, her voice choked with tears. I had no idea they were that cruel with their exact words. The raw, unvarnished truth had finally pierced through her long-held defenses. That same night, during our customary walk, the air between us heavy with the day's revelations, she explained something I hadn't truly grasped before. As a child, she had developed a profound, automatic coping mechanism, using humor to deflect her parents' relentless criticism. She would laugh along with their digs, a preemptive strike, a self-protective shield, so that their barbs wouldn't sting quite so deeply. When they would mock her grades or ridicule her friends, she would instinctively turn it into a joke, neutralizing their power before it could inflict genuine pain. It became an ingrained, almost unconscious survival strategy, one she didn't even realize she was deploying. And when they had turned their critical gaze on me, and she had laughed alongside them, she hadn't been trying to be cruel or complicit. She was simply automatically reverting to this deeply ingrained childhood pattern, a reflex born of self-preservation. In that moment of shared vulnerability, my perspective underwent a profound shift. I began to see those painful past moments through an entirely different lens, not as her joining them against me, but as her desperate attempt to survive them. The only way her ingrained coping mechanism knew how. It was an epiphany that solidified our bond. That night, under the same familiar streetlights, we made a joint, decisive commitment. We would skip all family events, from both sides, for an entire month, dedicating that precious space and time to focus exclusively on us, our healing, and our relationship. Predictably, both sets of parents protested immediately, their indignation palpable. My own mother called 3 times, her voice laced with thinly veiled guilt and manipulation, claiming she desperately wanted to help with baby preparation. Oriana's parents, true to form, deluged us with lengthy, emotionally charged guilt trip texts, expounding on the paramount importance of family being everything, yet we held firm, a united front. We reiterated our need for space, explaining that we had to work on our relationship without the suffocating pressure of external expectations. Her mom, seemingly undeterred by our refusal, even showed up at our apartment uninvited, standing on our doorstep. But we, with a heavy heart but unwavering resolve, simply didn't answer the door. My dad, in his own characteristic way, sent a series of emails lamenting how we were making a terrible mistake, despite the crushing guilt, despite feeling as though we were letting everyone down. We steadfastly stuck to our decision. The stakes were too high, our future too important, to yield to their manipulation. The very next morning, the emotional breakthroughs of the past few days were starkly contrasted by the cold, hard realities of our financial situation. We sat at the kitchen table, our laptops open, illuminated by the harsh glow of bank statements and rental websites. Ariana, ever the meticulous planner, had already created a daunting spreadsheet. Columns meticulously itemized projected baby costs, my income, her income, and, most crushingly, the anticipated expenses of 2 separate apartments. The numbers, no matter how many times we rearranged them, no matter how many hypothetical scenarios she meticulously typed into her spreadsheet, simply wouldn't work. The mathematical equation of our fractured lives refused to balance. While she continued to frantically input different possibilities, I scoured online listings for cheaper, more geographically convenient places, hoping to somehow conjure a solution. The logistics alone were mind-boggling. We'd need 2 cribs, 2 car seats, essentially double everything. After 2 grueling hours, the weight of the impossible calculations became unbearable. We closed our laptops, defeated, without making a single decision, the stark reality of the math leaving us both feeling physically sick. 3 days later, the need for practicality superseded our desire for absolute separation. Ariana drove alone to her parents' house, a strategic decision we'd made to avoid further conflict, hoping to retrieve some of her old baby things from their attic. It was a concession to necessity, a small breach in our newly established boundaries. Barely an hour later, my phone buzzed. A text from her, a concise message that confirmed our worst fears. Months following me around, it read, asking questions. The relentless pressure, the subtle but persistent invasion, had already begun. about why we so desperately needed space. She tried to explain, her voice quiet but firm, but it seemed the words just wouldn't penetrate the entrenched beliefs of her family. Then an agonizing silence descended, the text stopping abruptly for 3 long, unbearable hours. When she finally came home, the late evening light caught the puffiness around her eyes, a testament to raw, and tears. The sharp clatter of a cardboard box hitting the polished hardwood floor echoed through the quiet house, a box overflowing with tiny baby clothes. Her mom, Ariana recounted, had unleashed a barrage of accusations, painting her as a betrayer who had chosen me, a relative stranger, over her own flesh and blood. She'd been labeled ungrateful, forgetting all the sacrifices they'd made, blind to the endless efforts they'd poured into her upbringing. But this time, something had snapped. Ariana had finally found her voice, a new, steely edge to it, and told her mom, with unwavering conviction, to stop treating her like a child. The confrontation had escalated, their voices rising to a furious crescendo in the driveway, sharp words flung back and forth like daggers, while neighbors furtively peered from behind curtains. Silent witnesses to the raw, public display of family discord. Her dad, usually a stoic presence, had to rush outside to mediate, his calm voice a fragile shield against their fury. As Ariana recounted the harrowing details, her hands trembled almost imperceptibly, yet an undeniable shift had occurred within her. She seemed, in that moment, somehow taller, her posture subtly straightened, as if the act of finally standing up for herself, of reclaiming her autonomy, had literally changed the way she carried her own body. That weekend, as we quietly cleaned the nursery, the scent of French paint mingling with the subtle aroma of sawdust, I found myself pausing, my gaze fixed on her. The heavy weight of an unconfessed sin had been gnawing at my conscience, and I knew, with a sudden, painful clarity, that I could no longer bear its burden. Ariana, I began, my voice a little rough. I need to apologize for something that has been eating at me, truly devouring me from the inside out. I confess that using Jack's tragic death, the memory of my little brother who died so young at 6, to cover my own pathetic lie, had been the most abhorrent thing I'd done in all of this tumultuous mess. How could I have defiled such a sacred, painful memory to protect myself from getting caught, from facing the consequences of my own cowardice? She deserved so much better than someone capable of such a despicable act. Ariana, who had been meticulously rolling paint onto the walls, slowly put down the roller, the gentle thud barely audible. She turned, her eyes meeting mine, and walked towards me. She understood, she said softly, why I had panicked, the fear that had driven me to such a desperate act. But the revelation had truly bothered her, too, leaving a sharp, unsettling sting. We stood there in the half-painted room, a poignant symbol of our unfinished, uncertain future, not touching, the physical distance mirroring the emotional one, but finally being honest about that specific, festering hurt that had silently festered between us. Monday morning arrived with a cold, corporate chill. My supervisor, his face unusually grim, summoned me into his office, an HR representative already seated there, her demeanor professional but stern. They had my performance review printed out, the pages riddled with a shocking number of angry red marks, glaring symbols of my recent failures. I'd missed 3 crucial deadlines, been inexplicably late to client meetings, and the quality of my project deliverables had plummeted, a clear indicator of my rapidly declining focus. They placed me on a formal improvement plan, a carefully structured pathway to potential redemption, complete with weekly check-ins and exacting targets I absolutely had to hit. The HR rep, in a tone that was both empathetic and unyielding, acknowledged that personal issues happen, but the company, she underscored, needed me to be fully functional. I signed the paperwork, each stroke of the pen a stark reminder of how incredibly lucky I was not to have been summarily fired. Walking back to my desk, every casual glance, every hushed whisper felt directed at me, a crushing weight of perceived judgment, even though, rationally, I knew they probably weren't watching. The shame was all-consuming. That evening, as we chopped vegetables and stirred sauces, the comforting rhythm of cooking filling the kitchen, Ariana's phone buzzed with an incoming text from her dad. She picked it up, her expression unreadable. Then, in a conscious effort towards the openness we were so diligently trying to cultivate, she read it aloud. He had written that no matter what tumultuous currents ran between us, the baby would always be his grandchild, a treasured member of their family, and always welcome in their home. It wasn't, we both recognized, an explicit apology for the litany of cruel, cutting things they'd said, the hurtful accusations still echoing in her memory. But it was something. A hesitant, fragile step towards mending, an olive branch, however thorny. Ariana saved the message, the click of her phone a quiet punctuation mark, and we continued cooking, not speaking another word about it, letting the sentiment, however imperfect, settle in the air between us. 2 nights later, the world outside cloaked in the deep, silent indigo of 2 a.m. I was jolted awake by Ariana's frantic shaking of my shoulder. Her voice, thin and terrified, sliced through the darkness. I'm bleeding. We have to go to the hospital. Right now, panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I scrambled into clothes, my hands fumbling with buttons, while she, with remarkable composure despite her fear, dialed her doctor's emergency line. The 10-minute drive to urgent care stretched into an eternity, each passing second agonizing crawl as the streetlights blurred into streaks of anxious light. I can't lose the baby, she whispered repeatedly, her voice laced with desperation. Not now. Not after everything we'd been through. I clutched her hand tightly at every red light, offering a silent promise of support, a desperate prayer. The waiting room, stark and sterile, was almost entirely empty, yet we still endured a torturous 40-minute wait to be seen. Ariana leaned against me, her body trembling slightly. And in that moment of profound vulnerability, all the thorny issues of our relationship, our trust issues, our unresolved conflicts evaporated. There was only one shared primal fear, the fervent, silent hope that our baby, was okay. What else could possibly matter in the face of such a terrifying uncertainty? The doctor, a calm presence in the midst of our storm, finally called us back and performed an ultrasound, the moment of truth. And then, a miracle, a strong, steady heartbeat pulsed rhythmically on the monitor, a powerful, unwavering lifeline. The bleeding, she explained gently, was from a small, insignificant tear that would heal naturally with a few days of rest. The immense wave of relief that washed over us was so potent, so overwhelming, that we both broke down, tears streaming freely there in the cold, clinical exam room. The doctor reassured us, explaining that this was a surprisingly common occurrence, absolutely not our fault, but advised us to take it incredibly easy for a few days. Driving home at 4 a.m., the first blush of dawn painting the sky in soft hues of rose and gray, we were both utterly exhausted, drained to our cores, yet enveloped in a profound, almost spiritual gratitude. That terrifying scare had fundamentally shifted something crucial between us, a terrifying clarity reminding us, with brutal honesty, what truly irrevocably mattered most right now. Upon reaching home, the quiet intimacy of the morning broken only by our soft footsteps, Ariana voiced an unexpected thought. She believed we should try separate bedrooms for a while. Not, she quickly clarified, as a punishment or a retreat, but as a strategic move to give us both the much-needed space to process everything, the trauma, the arguments, the shifting dynamics without the constant, subtle friction of sharing a bed every night. With a heavy heart, I helped her move some clothes and personal items into the guest room, arranging her things in the unfamiliar space. It felt undeniably sad, watching her meticulously place her belongings, a visible separation of our lives. Yet, paradoxically, we both slept better that night, the individual solace of our own spaces offering a much-needed respite. 3 days later, we braced ourselves for the emotional gauntlet of a video call with both sets of parents to explain, with as much clarity and composure as we could muster, where we currently stood. Ariana's parents appeared on her laptop screen, their faces a mixture of expectation and apprehension. Mine were visible on my phone, precariously propped against a water glass, creating a digital tableau of two families, two distinct worlds. We explained, with carefully chosen words, that our current focus was squarely on being good co-parents, nurturing the impending arrival, rather than attempting to force our romantic relationship to function right now, acknowledging the futility of pushing something that wasn't ready. My mom, a cascade of tears already welling in her eyes, started crying immediately, her heartbreak palpable even through the screen. Ariana's mom, ever pragmatic and forceful, declared us ridiculous and insisted we should try harder, her frustration thinly veiled. Her dad remained conspicuously quiet, his disappointment a heavy, silent presence that spoke volumes. My dad, ever the pragmatist, immediately started asking highly practical, almost detached questions about potential custody arrangements and future living situations. We maintained our composure, a united front, and calmly repeated, like a broken record, that this was simply what we needed to do for everyone's well-being. The call finally ended, leaving everyone unhappy, the conversation a tense, emotional stalemate, but at least, for better or worse, they now knew precisely where we stood. The very next afternoon, despite the separate bedrooms, we stumbled into our first truly significant argument since making the delicate shift. Ariana, her eyes alight with cultural pride, passionately believed the baby should learn Italian, a beautiful, deeply personal connection to her cherished family heritage. I, on the other hand, worried it would be confusing for a developing child and, perhaps more significantly, I harbored a lingering anxiety about what her parents would inevitably say or think if they believed the child couldn't understand them. Then, the conversation pivoted to the emotionally charged topic of last names. She wanted her name included, a testament to her identity and lineage, and I, naturally, wanted mine. We went back and forth for an entire hour, our voices growing progressively louder, the air thick with passionate disagreement, but crucially, never descending into meanness or personal attacks. Finally, with a weary but mutual agreement, we decided to table the contentious issue, postponing a final decision until after the birth, when we would be forced to decide for real. It was, surprisingly, a small but significant triumph, a testament to our evolving, albeit fragile, dynamic. We could disagree vehemently, passionately, without it completely destroying us. Was this what progress looked like in our peculiar, broken, yet healing relationship? That Saturday marked another milestone, our very first prenatal class at the hospital, typically a joyous occasion for expectant parents. We walked in together, a palpable space between us, and instinctively sought out seats in the very back corner, a quiet retreat from the bustling energy. Every other couple in the room seemed to radiate pure, unadulterated happiness and excited anticipation, holding hands tenderly, rubbing burgeoning bellies with soft, reassuring strokes. We, in stark contrast, sat with an almost visible buffer between us, diligently taking notes as the instructor, a picture of calm expertise, demonstrated various breathing techniques. When she had us practice positions for labor, the intimacy of the task felt oddly discordant with our current reality. We worked together with a strange, almost clinical professionalism, like coworkers collaborating on a crucial project, efficient and focused, yet devoid of the tender touch or whispered encouragement that seemed to come so naturally to the other couples. The bizarre normalcy of learning about the mechanics of contractions and the process of pushing, all while our own romantic relationship hung precariously in limbo, felt profoundly surreal. A bizarre juxtaposition of burgeoning life and a dissolving partnership. It was a cognitive dissonance, a stark, unsettling paradox that this whole situation had become truly bizarre. During a brief intermission in the class, another seemingly well-adjusted couple, perhaps curious about our dynamic, innocently inquired about the duration of our relationship. In a moment of almost comedic synchronicity, we both blurted out answers simultaneously, but with wildly conflicting numbers. Perhaps I said 7 years, while Ariana, with a slight shake of her head, might have insisted on 5. Their faces, initially friendly and open, contorted into a mask of utter bewilderment before they, perhaps out of politeness or sheer discomfort, abruptly steered the conversation to a safer, less confusing topic. We were then condemned, it felt, to endure the entirety of the remaining 3-hour class, absorbing lectures on everything from the intricacies of epidural procedures to the tender realities of breastfeeding, all while meticulously avoiding even the briefest flicker of eye contact with each other, each of us trapped in our own awkward silence. 2 days later, as I returned home from work, a stark, an adorned cardboard box sat propped against our apartment door. It was notably large, almost imposing, yet bore no discernible label, no shipping information, not even a hastily scrawled note. A strange mix of surprise and apprehension rippled through me as I carefully picked it up, noting its unexpected weight, and carried it inside. I set it gently on the kitchen counter, the dull thud echoing in the quiet space, just as Ariana, drawn by the unexpected arrival, walked over, her curiosity a visible question mark on her face. With a shared, unspoken hesitation, she pulled back the cardboard flaps. Inside, nestled amongst tissue paper, she first retrieved a tiny, impossibly small onesie, its soft fabric adorned with elegant Italian script. Perhaps a tender phrase like amor mio. Next came a smooth, wooden rattle, simple yet classic, followed by a familiar, exquisitely soft blanketed cherished heirloom her grandmother had lovingly crafted years ago, now smelling faintly of mothballs and distant memories. It became clear, with a sinking feeling, that her mom, in a gesture that was as loving as it was subtly confrontational, had simply deposited these baby essentials without so much as a knock or a word. We stood there, side by side yet miles apart, gazing at the assortment of carefully chosen items spread across the gleaming kitchen counter. A profound sense of unease settled over us. How were we supposed to interpret this? Was it a peace offering, a softening of their stance, or another passive-aggressive maneuver from parents who, in virtually every other aspect of our lives, continued to be incredibly difficult and resistant to our new reality? Was this their way of acknowledging the baby while still rejecting the parents-to-be? I found myself almost automatically folding the precious, hand-stitched blanket back into a neat square, while Ariana, with a sigh of resignation, carefully placed the other items into an empty drawer, perhaps hoping to tuck away some of the accompanying emotional baggage. Neither of us could quite articulate whether acknowledging the gesture with a simple thanks to her mom via text would open a welcome dialogue or, conversely, just invite more unwanted complexity. The following week, the heavy mantle of our impending separation led us to a downtown office for an appointment with a mediator, tasked with the clinical parsing of our co-parenting agreement. We found ourselves seated on opposite sides of a polished, impersonal conference table, a physical manifestation of the emotional chasm between us, as the mediator, with a calm, business-like efficiency, systematically itemized the myriad decisions we would have to make. These ranged from the mundane, like meticulously structured custody schedules that would govern every waking moment of our future child's life, to the deeply personal, such as who would have the baby for which holidays, and the weighty responsibility of joint medical choices. The mediator's timing felt almost eerily convenient, didn't it? Here we were, already navigating the nuanced battlegrounds of Italian lessons and the contentious issue of last names, managing, somehow, to argue without completely destroying each other. And suddenly, official help appeared on the scene. It made me wonder, quite genuinely, if someone, perhaps a well-meaning but meddling relative, had discreetly suggested this intervention, or if, in a moment of simultaneous clarity, we had both independently concluded that formal assistance was desperately needed right after yet another exhausting, but ultimately non-destructive, confrontation. She continued, her voice even and unemotional, probing into every conceivable aspect of our future. Who would be responsible for the baby during extensive summer breaks? The financially significant question of who would claim the baby on taxes, and the potentially devastating implications if one of us ever decided to uproot our lives and move to a different city. We spent a grueling 3 hours dissecting every imaginable scenario, meticulously writing down binding agreements about precise pickup times, vital emergency contacts, and the equitable division of all future expenses. The mediator, a silent, efficient scribe, typed everything into a sterile document while we sat there. To individuals forced to meticulously blueprint a future we still found utterly impossible to truly visualize, let alone emotionally embrace. That very night, fueled by a newfound resolve, I finally completed the letter to her parents, painstakingly drafted in Italian. It was a carefully worded, emotionally charged document, delineating our non-negotiable boundaries moving forward, particularly concerning their respect for us as a couple or soon-to-be co-parents and, crucially, how they were to speak about me. Ariana, with a critical eye, read through every sentence, offering a few shrewd edits to sharpen its impact. Then, with a silent but powerful agreement, we printed it out. She signed her name with a firm flourish, directly beside mine at the botomapotent symbol of our united front. The Italian, once a language I'd only pretended to understand, now flowed with unexpected ease, a liberation from years of pretense. I deliberately employed formal, precise language, choosing every word to make it unequivocally clear that we were absolutely serious about enforcing these new rules. We mailed the letter the very next morning, a solemn ritual performed on our way to our separate jobs, a physical act sealing our declaration. That same afternoon, her parents, as predicted, called Ariana, but she, with a deliberate and decisive act of boundary enforcement, let it go straight to voicemail. That evening, we listened to her mom's confused, somewhat bewildered message together, her voice betraying a mix of hurt, indignation, and genuine perplexity. 4 days later, in a carefully orchestrated attempt to test the efficacy of our new boundaries, we ventured to her parents' house for dinner. Her mom, in her usual, well-intentioned but overwhelming manner, cooked an extravagant, almost comically excessive amount of food, enough to feed an army, as always. Her dad, perhaps out of habit or a subtle disregard, poured wine even though Ariana, visibly pregnant, politely declined. For the most part, they admirably adhered to speaking English, a notable departure from their usual Italian dominance. However, her mom, out of ingrained habit or perhaps a momentary lapse in self-control, slipped twice. Once, with a barely perceptible flick of her eyes, she made a quiet, almost dismissive comment about my shirt. Later, she subtly inquired of her dad about something concerning my car, a probing question disguised as an aside. Both times, I responded immediately and firmly, articulating my answer in flawless Italian, subtly but clearly reminding them of our new agreement. They looked genuinely surprised, their faces registering a flicker of astonishment, but to our relief, they stopped. In a truly unexpected moment, her dad even engaged me in conversation about my work, in English, and for the first time, he actually seemed to listen, truly absorbing my answer about the new project I was managing. We left after 2 hours, utterly exhausted by the sheer emotional effort of the evening, but cautiously calling it progress. After all, no one had yelled, no one had stormed out a marked improvement over previous encounters. Back at work, the newfound clarity in my personal life began to translate into tangible professional improvements. I felt my focus, once scattered and elusive, slowly return, and I found myself meeting deadlines with a renewed sense of purpose. My supervisor, astute and observant, noticed the positive shift, mentioning it during our weekly check-in, remarking that I seemed more settled, a sense of calm having replaced the previous turbulence. Driven to erase the lingering effects of my worst weeks, I voluntarily stayed late a few nights, meticulously catching up on the backlog, organizing long-neglected files, and finally completing reports that had languished, gathering digital dust. The performance improvement plan, a stark reminder of my recent struggles, was technically still in place, but the gnawing anxiety about potentially losing my job had, mercifully, dissipated. Even my coworkers, who for weeks had offered me concerned, sympathetic glances as I passed their desks, now simply offered polite nods, their unspoken worries apparently alleviated. That weekend, the weight of an even more profound, long-avoided conversation finally settled upon Ariana and me, the raw, agonizing question whether we genuinely still loved each other, or if we were merely going through the motions, performing a charade solely for the sake of the baby. After dinner, we gravitated to the living room couch, but chose to sit on opposite ends, the physical distance a silent echo of our emotional chasm. As we spoke, our fingers, almost unconsciously, picked at loose threads on the cushions, a small, nervous habit that betrayed the profound unraveling we felt inside. She, with a voice laden with a weary honesty, confessed that she still loved me, but then, her gaze distant, admitted she didn't know if she could ever fully trust me again. Not after what she described as 2 years of lies, a painful reference to the deceptions that had corroded the foundation of our relationship. I, in turn, told her that I, too, loved her, but acknowledged with a heavy heart that I completely understood if rebuilding trust felt like an impossible endeavor, not just after what I'd done, but also after what she'd done, a subtle yet significant implication of shared culpability in our marital demise. We reached a somber agreement. Love, by itself, was simply not enough. Trust, that fragile, indispensable bond, would require an immeasurable amount of time and effort to rebuild, if indeed, it could ever truly be resurrected at all. Neither of us cried, perhaps too emotionally depleted for tears. But as we retreated to our separate rooms for the night, the profound weariness etched on both our faces was undeniable. A few nights later, in a strange echo of our evolving dynamic, we found ourselves working side by side, focused on a shared, hopeful task, setting up the nursery. We carefully maneuvered the crib from its large cardboard box, which felt oddly familiar, into its designated corner, then collaboratively hung the delicate mobile her cousin had thoughtfully sent, its tiny figures poised to dance. Ariana, with a casual gesture, found an Italian children's show on her tablet and let its cheerful sounds fill the room while we meticulously organized tiny clothes into dresser drawers. The cartoon characters sang simple, repetitive songs about colors and numbers as we worked, and in a small, yet profoundly significant shift, neither of us pretended not to understand the Italian anymore. I even caught myself, quite unexpectedly, humming along to one of the catchy tunes as I arranged stacks of diapers on the changing table. And then, I saw it. Ariana, noticing my unconscious participation, actually smiled a little rare, fleeting glimpse of genuine warmth, a quiet moment of shared connection, however brief. We worked like that for nearly 2 hours, largely in silence, our communication reduced to effortless nonverbal cues, passing each other tools, holding things steady, finding a new kind of rhythm that felt profoundly peaceful, even if it was distinctly devoid of romance. That same night, her parents sent a text message about the upcoming prenatal appointment, meticulously written in Italian, just as they always did when communicating with Ariana. This time, however, I picked up my phone and, without a moment's hesitation, typed out a response in Italian, confirming the date and time. Ariana watched me from across the room, a quiet observer of this new interaction. Her dad's reply was a simple yet significant thumbs-up emoji, while her mom sent a little heart. Both gestures, though small, felt like a powerful affirmation, accepting my. It was a response, yes, but one utterly devoid of a single spoken word, a quiet acknowledgement that hung in the air like an unspoken agreement, perhaps a shared understanding that words, at that moment, would only complicate what was already so exquisitely tangled. Our relationship, or whatever amorphous entity it had become, existed in a liminal space, a curious emotional nebula where the clear-cut definitions of together and apart simply dissolved. We weren't holding hands and planning a future in the conventional sense, nor were we living entirely separate lives, stripped of all connection. Instead, imagine two celestial bodies, distinct yet held in an intricate, gravitational dance. They are close enough to feel each other's pull, distant enough to maintain individual orbits. Is that together or apart? It's neither, and it's beautifully, bewilderingly both. This wasn't some haphazard arrangement, but a deliberate, albeit clumsy, forging of a new paradigm for family. It was a structure so fresh, so unconventional, that the lexicon of relationships simply hadn't caught up. We were living a reality for which no convenient label or well-worn phrase yet existed. We were, in essence, pioneering a new architectural blueprint for human connection, one brick at a time, without a formal name for the edifice we were constructing. Honestly, as I reflect on this persistent not together, yet not apart dynamic they keep alluding to, I can't help but feel a compelling curiosity myself. What intricate emotional pathways are they truly navigating? Is it a strategic avoidance of commitment, a lingering attachment that defies traditional boundaries, or perhaps something even more profound, a revolutionary reimagining of relational bonds in a world that often demands rigid categories? It genuinely begs the question, doesn't it? It truly makes one pause and ponder the ever-evolving complexities of human connection, forcing us to question our preconceived notions of what works or what should be in a relationship. And with that intriguing paradox hanging in the air, I'll bid you farewell for now. Let that thought simmer, marinate in your own reflections, and perhaps spark some new perspectives for you. Until our next fascinating dive into the human experience, keep questioning, keep exploring. And if these kinds of nuanced discussions resonate with you, do consider hitting that subscribe button and joining our community for more thought-provoking content just like this.